The ancient ceremonial grounds of the Myrax pack gleamed under the light of the full moon, crystalline formations embedded in the mountain peak catching and reflecting the silver radiance until the entire sacred space seemed to pulse with otherworldly power. Tonight was the binding ceremony, when fated mates would be joined before the eyes of the pack and the blessing of the moon goddess herself. Cale Silverstone knelt among the other unmated wolves, his heart hammering against his ribs, as he waited for the moment that would define the rest of his life. At 21, he was considered mature for bonding, his Omega nature having manifested early along with the rare empathic abilities that marked him as special among his kind. The Silverstone bloodline was ancient and noble, tracing their lineage back to the founding of the pack itself. Across the ceremonial circle stood Ryan Ironmaw, heir to the pack leadership and everything an alpha should be. Tall and powerfully built, with the kind of commanding presence that made other wolves instinctively submit, Ryan embodied the strength and dominance that their people valued above all else. His dark fur gleamed almost black in the moonlight when he was in wolf form, and his human appearance was equally striking with sharp features and steel-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. Cale had felt the pull toward Ryan for months, the inexorable tug of a fated bond that grew stronger with each passing day. In his dreams, he saw their future together, the powerful Alpha and his devoted Omega, working side by side to strengthen the pack and continue their noble bloodlines. It was everything he had been raised to expect, everything his family had prepared him for since childhood. The pack elder raised his ceremonial staff, calling upon the ancient powers to reveal the bonds that the moon goddess had decreed. One by one, silver threads of light began to appear, connecting destined pairs across the circle. The sight never failed to inspire awe, no matter how many times Cale had witnessed it during previous ceremonies. When the thread blazed to life between him and Ryan, Cale felt a surge of joy so intense it nearly brought tears to his eyes. This was it, his destiny, his purpose, his future. He began to rise, following the ancient protocol that would bring him to the center of the circle to meet his mate and pledge their eternal bond. But Ryan's face twisted with disgust as he stared at the silver cord connecting them. The expression was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Cale had imagined, that for a moment he couldn't process what he was seeing. An Omega? Ryan's voice cut through the sacred silence like a blade, his tone filled with contempt and disbelief. The moon goddess expects me to bind myself to this pathetic creature? I think not. The words hit Cale like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. Around the circle, the pack gasped and murmured, their shock and embarrassment washing over him through his empathic abilities in waves of suffocating emotion. Ryan, the elder began, his ancient voice carrying a note of warning. The bonds revealed tonight are sacred. To reject a fated mate is to reject the will of the moon goddess herself. Then perhaps the moon goddess has made a mistake, Ryan replied coldly, his alpha authority making his words carry to every corner of the ceremonial space. I am the future leader of this pack. I need a mate who can stand beside me in strength, not cower behind me in weakness. This Omega is not worthy of alpha blood. Ryan reached out with deliberate slowness and grasped the silver thread connecting them. Cale felt the bond pulling taut, the spiritual connection that should have brought them together instead becoming a source of agony as Ryan's rejection flooded through it. I, Ryan Ironmaw, heir to the Myrax pack, reject this bond, Ryan declared formally. I will not be tied to weakness, to shame, to the disgrace of an Omega who brings nothing but dishonor to our bloodline. With that, he tore the thread apart. The pain was indescribable. Cale collapsed to his knees as agony ripped through his chest, the severed bond leaving wounds in his soul that felt like they would never heal. The rejection trauma hit him in waves. Physical pain that made his body convulse, emotional devastation that left him gasping for breath, and the crushing weight of public humiliation that pressed down on him like a mountain. Through his empathic abilities, he could feel the pack's emotions. Pity, embarrassment, disapproval, and underneath it all, a growing sense that perhaps Ryan was right. Perhaps an Omega truly wasn't worthy of their future alpha. Perhaps Cale really was as pathetic as Ryan claimed. Remove him, Ryan commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion save cold dismissal. I won't have this shame staining our sacred ceremony any longer. Strong hands grabbed Kale's shoulders, hauling him to his feet, though his legs could barely support his weight. Through the haze of pain and shock, he heard his own family members speaking in hushed, ashamed tones. They made no move to defend him, offered no words of comfort. The rejection of his fated mate had become their rejection as well. "Please," Kale whispered, the word barely audible even to his own ears, but no one was listening. The ceremony continued around him as if he had never existed, other bonds being celebrated while his own lay in shattered pieces on the ceremonial ground. They dragged him from the sacred space to the edge of pack territory, his father's face a mask of disappointment and shame. "You've brought disgrace to the Silverstone name," Marcus Silverstone said coldly. "Perhaps it's better this way. Perhaps you were never meant to be part of this pack." "But I'm your son," Kale pleaded, desperation making his voice crack. "A son who has proven himself unworthy of an alpha's bond," his father replied. "Ryan Ironmaw is our future leader. If he finds you lacking, then perhaps you are indeed lacking. Do us all a favor and disappear before your pathetic existence brings further shame to our bloodline." The words were like a final death blow to what remained of Kale's spirit. His own father, the man who had raised him and taught him to take pride in their noble heritage, was casting him out like garbage. The pack token that had marked him as a member of Myrax since birth was torn from his throat, taking with it his name, his status, his very identity. They left him at the forest's edge with nothing but the ceremonial robes on his back. No supplies, no shelter, no means of survival. The northern forests were harsh and unforgiving, especially as winter approached, but the pack clearly didn't care whether he lived or died. In fact, from the cold dismissal in their eyes, Kale suspected they would prefer the latter. For 3 days, he wandered deeper into the wilderness, driven by a combination of shame and desperation. He couldn't return to Packlands. That would only bring further humiliation to his family and risk violent retaliation from Ryan. But he also had no idea where else to go. His entire life had been centered around the pack, his identity built around his role as a noble Omega destined for a powerful mate. The rejection trauma had done more than break his heart. It had shattered his connection to his wolf nature. He found himself unable to shift, his other form seeming to recoil from him in revulsion. Without his wolf's enhanced senses and strength, he was just a broken human stumbling through dangerous territory with no survival skills and no hope. On the 4th day, hunger and exhaustion finally overcame him. He collapsed beside a frozen stream, his body too weak to continue. As consciousness faded, Kale found himself almost grateful. Death would be a mercy compared to the constant agony of existing as a rejected, worthless creature that even his own family couldn't love. But death didn't come. Instead, he woke to find himself in a warm bed, surrounded by stone walls hung with tapestries that seemed to shift and move in the flickering candlelight. The air carried scents he couldn't identify, something like sulfur and honey mixed with ancient books and burning wood. "Finally awake, are we?" The voice was cultured and smooth, with an accent that seemed to shift and change like the tapestries on the walls. Kale turned toward the sound and felt his breath catch in his throat. The being seated near the window was unlike anything in Kale's experience. Tall and elegantly built, with pale skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light and hair so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His features were sharp and aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a mouth that suggested both cruelty and sensuality. But it was the wings that marked him as something otherworldly. Great black appendages that curved gracefully behind his shoulders, their surface gleaming like polished obsidian. Most striking of all were his eyes. Deep red like garnets or fresh blood, ancient and knowing in a way that spoke of centuries or perhaps millennia of existence. "I am Vurian Shadowflight," the demon said, rising with fluid grace. "And you, little wolf, were dying in territory that technically belongs to me. I couldn't have that. Corpses are so untidy, and they upset the local wildlife." "I'm sorry," Kale whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse and shame. "I didn't know. I'll leave." "You'll do nothing of the sort," Vurian interrupted. his tone carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "You're barely alive as it is. Besides, I invested good coin in acquiring you from the flesh traders who found you. I'd hate to see that investment wasted so quickly." The words took a moment to penetrate Kale's confused mind. "Acquired me? Bought and paid for?" Varian confirmed with a slight smile that revealed teeth just a fraction too sharp to be human. "You're mine now, little wolf. The question is what to do with you." Kale's heart sank even further than he'd thought possible. He had gone from rejected mate to bought slave in the span of a week. The fall from his noble birth to this degradation was so complete that he almost couldn't process it. "What do you want from me?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Varian studied him with those ancient red eyes, his expression unreadable. "That depends entirely on what you're capable of offering. You're clearly well-bred despite your current condition. Your bone structure and bearing speak of noble blood. You have some education, judging by your speech patterns. And there's something else about you, something I can't quite identify." He moved closer, and Kale caught a whiff of his scent. Something like midnight air and storm winds, otherworldly and compelling. "Tell me, little wolf, what made your pack cast you out? What great sin did you commit to deserve such punishment?" The question reopened wounds that had barely begun to scab over. Kale's eyes filled with tears. He tried desperately to blink back. "I was rejected by my fated mate. He said I was weak, unworthy, a disgrace to alpha blood. My own family agreed." "Ah," Varian said softly, and there was something almost like understanding in his tone. "A political rejection, then. Your mate chose pack standing over the bonds of fate. How very predictable." "It wasn't political," Kale protested weakly. "He was right. I am weak. I can barely shift anymore. I have no fighting skills, no useful talents. I'm exactly what he said I was. Pathetic." Varian's laugh was rich and dark, like aged wine poured over velvet. "My dear boy, if you were truly pathetic, you would have died in those woods instead of surviving 4 days without supplies or shelter. If you were truly weak, the rejection trauma would have killed you outright rather than merely breaking your connection to your wolf form. And if you were truly worthless, I wouldn't be sensing the potential that radiates from you like heat from a forge." "Potential?" Kale looked up at him with confusion and the faintest flicker of hope. "Oh yes," Varian confirmed, settling back into his chair with the grace of a predator at rest. "You have something unusual about you, something your pack was too blind to recognize. I suspect that's why your mate felt threatened enough to reject you so publicly. He could sense your potential even if he couldn't identify it. But what potential could I possibly have? I'm just a broken Omega. You're an Omega who survived rejection trauma, abandonment by his family, and exposure in the northern forests. You're an Omega who chose to walk away from everything he knew rather than beg for acceptance from those who had already proven themselves unworthy of him. That suggests strength of a kind your former pack couldn't begin to understand." Varian's words were like balm on wounds Kale hadn't even realized were still bleeding. For the first time since the rejection, someone was suggesting that he might have value, that his survival might represent strength rather than mere stubborn refusal to die. "What happens now?" Kale asked quietly. "Now you recover," Varian said matter-of-factly. "You eat, you rest, you regain your strength. When you're ready, we'll discuss your future and what role you might play in my household." "Role? I have need of someone to manage certain aspects of my domain. The library requires organization, correspondence needs attention, and I occasionally host guests who require delicate handling. Someone with your background and abilities might prove useful in such endeavors." It wasn't the life Kale had imagined for himself, but it was more than he had dared hope for since his rejection. A chance to be useful, to have purpose, to perhaps even rebuild some semblance of dignity. "I accept," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "Excellent," Varian replied with that sharp-edged smile. "But understand this. You are not my prisoner here. You serve because you choose to, not because you're compelled to. The moment you wish to leave, you need only say so, and I'll provide you with supplies and safe passage to wherever you wish to go." The offer was unexpected and strangely touching. In a world where he had been treated as property to be discarded, this demon was offering him genuine choice. Why? Kale asked. Why give me that option when you've already invested in buying me? Vurian was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to look through Kale to something beyond. Because, he said finally, service freely given is infinitely more valuable than obedience extracted by force. And because I have learned, over many centuries of existence, that the most interesting relationships are those built on mutual choice rather than imposed obligation. In the days that followed, Kale began to understand what Vurian had meant. The demon's domain was vast and complex, part fortress and part library, part laboratory and part sanctuary. Vurian himself was an enigma, capable of casual cruelty one moment and unexpected kindness the next, ancient beyond measure yet somehow not jaded or bitter as Kale had expected. The work Vurian had mentioned proved both challenging and rewarding. The library was extensive, containing texts on subjects Kale had never imagined existed. Many were in languages he didn't recognize, but Vurian proved an excellent teacher, sharing knowledge with a patience that surprised them both. You have a gift for languages? Vurian observed one afternoon as Kale successfully translated a particularly complex passage from an ancient demonic text. And your empathic abilities are stronger than you realize. You're not just reading the words. You're understanding the emotions and intentions behind them. It was true. Kale had discovered that his rejection trauma, rather than destroying his abilities, had somehow enhanced them. He could sense the emotional resonance in written words, understand the deeper meanings that lay beneath surface text. It made him uniquely qualified for the kind of scholarly work that Vurian valued. But more than the work itself, Kale found himself drawn to his enigmatic master. Vurian was nothing like the demons from traditional werewolf stories. He wasn't cruel or capricious, didn't torture his servants or revel in causing pain. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in knowledge, in understanding, in building something meaningful rather than simply accumulating power. Why do you do this? Kale asked one evening as they worked together in the library, translating a series of diplomatic correspondence between various supernatural factions. You could rule through fear, take whatever you wanted by force. Why choose cooperation and scholarship instead? Vurian paused in his work, his red eyes reflecting the candlelight as he considered the question. Because I've tried the other way, he said finally. For the first several centuries of my existence, I was exactly what your people expect demons to be, cruel, dominating, taking pleasure in the suffering of others. It grew tiresome, empty. There's no challenge in breaking something that can't fight back, no satisfaction in ruling through terror alone. And now I find myself more interested in building than destroying, in understanding than conquering. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. In connections that matter, rather than power that ultimately means nothing. The admission hung between them, surprisingly vulnerable coming from such an ancient and powerful being. Kale felt his respect for Vurian deepen, along with something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. As weeks turned to months, their relationship continued to evolve. What had begun as master and servant gradually shifted into something more complex, teacher and student perhaps, or even something approaching friendship. Vurian never demanded more from Kale than he was willing to give, never used his obvious power to coerce or manipulate. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in helping Kale heal from his rejection trauma and discover his own capabilities. Under Vurian's patient guidance, Kale's confidence began to return, along with a growing sense of self-worth that didn't depend on other people's approval. You're different than when you first arrived, Vurian observed one evening as they shared dinner in his private chambers. Stronger, more certain of yourself. I had a good teacher, Kale replied, surprised by his own boldness in making such a personal comment. Did you? Vurian's smile was warmer than his usual sharp-edged expression. Or did you simply need time and space to remember who you were before others told you who you should be? The question struck deep, touching on truths Kale was only beginning to understand. His rejection had been devastating, but it had also freed him from the expectations and limitations that had defined his life within the pack. Here, with Virion, he was discovering aspects of himself he'd never known existed. It was during their 6th month together that everything changed. Kale had been working in the library when he sensed something wrong, a disturbance in the emotional atmosphere that made his newly enhanced abilities ring like alarm bells. He found Virion in the main hall, his wings partially extended in a display of agitation that Kale had never seen before. "What's wrong?" Kale asked, moving to stand beside the demon without conscious thought. "Trouble from the old territories," Virion replied grimly. "It seems the conflict between werewolves and demons has escalated beyond mere political posturing. There are reports of open warfare, with casualties on both sides. My former pack? Among others, the Myrax pack has allied itself with several other werewolf territories in what they're calling a cleansing campaign against demonic influence in the region." Kale felt his stomach drop. Despite everything that had happened, he still had complicated feelings about his birth pack. The thought of them engaged in deadly warfare was disturbing, especially knowing that innocents would inevitably be caught in the crossfire. "There's something else?" Virion continued, his tone becoming even more serious. "My sources indicate that you specifically are being sought, not as a returned exile, but as a potential weapon." "Weapon?" Kale was confused. "I'm nobody special. I can't even shift properly anymore." "That's where you're wrong," Virion said, turning to face him fully. "Your empathic abilities have grown exponentially since your rejection. You can sense emotions, influence them, even absorb pain from others. In the right circumstances, that makes you incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous." The revelation hit Kale like a physical blow. He had noticed his abilities strengthening, but he'd attributed it to Virion's teaching and his own healing process. The idea that he might be some kind of supernatural weapon was terrifying. "What do they want me for?" Imagine an Omega who could absorb the battle trauma from wounded warriors, allowing them to return to fight again within hours instead of weeks. Imagine someone who could influence enemy emotions, turning their own feelings against them. Imagine the strategic advantage such abilities would provide. Kale felt sick at the implications. "They want to use me as a tool for war." "They want to use you, period," Virion corrected. "Whether for war or other purposes remains to be seen. But they're actively searching for you, and they won't be deterred by my territorial claims if they believe you're here." "Then I should leave," Kale said immediately. "I won't bring danger to your domain because of my problems." "You're not bringing danger," Virion replied firmly. "You're being hunted by people who see you as property to be claimed rather than a person with the right to choose his own path. That's not your fault. But if they come here, they'll discover that I don't give up what's mine without a fight," Virion interrupted, his red eyes flashing with dangerous fire. "And you, Kale Silverstone, are decidedly mine to protect." The possessive declaration sent an unexpected thrill through Kale's chest. Not the possessiveness of ownership, but something deeper, the fierce protectiveness of someone who genuinely cared. "I don't want to be anyone's weapon," Kale said quietly. "Then you won't be," Virion replied simply. "We'll find another way." Before Kale could ask what he meant, alarms began ringing throughout the domain. The magical wards that protected Virion's territory were under attack, and the signature of the intruders was unmistakably werewolf. "They've found us," Virion said grimly, his wings spreading to their full impressive span. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, don't let them separate us." Through the domain's windows, they could see torches approaching through the forest. Dozens of werewolves surrounded the stronghold, their eyes glowing in the darkness like malevolent stars. At their head walked a figure Kale recognized with a mixture of dread and bitter irony. Ryan Ironmaw, the alpha who had rejected him so cruelly months before. Virion Shadowflight, Ryan's voice carried across the courtyard, amplified by alpha authority and magical enhancement. "We know you harbor stolen property. Return the Omega to us, and we'll consider your interference in werewolf affairs forgiven." "Stolen property?" Virion's laugh was cold and dangerous as he stepped onto the domain's front steps, Kale beside him. I purchased a dying creature from flesh traders and nursed him back to health. If that constitutes theft in your primitive understanding, perhaps you need to reconsider your definitions. The Omega was born Myrax's pack, Ryan called back. His bloodline, his abilities, his very existence belongs to us. You have no right to keep him from his people. His people? Virian's voice carried deadly amusement. You mean the same people who cast him out to die? The same people who rejected him as unworthy and stripped him of name and status? Those people? Kale felt a surge of gratitude for Virian's defense, but also a growing determination. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment he'd survived his rejection, and he was tired of other people making decisions about his life without consulting him. I can speak for myself, he said, stepping forward to stand fully beside Virian. The action was symbolic, choosing his place, his loyalty, his future. Ryan's expression twisted with something that might have been recognition or disgust. Kale, you look different. It was true. Months of good food, intellectual stimulation, and genuine care had transformed Kale from the broken creature who had stumbled into the northern forests. He stood straighter now, his eyes clear and determined rather than dulled by shame and despair. I am different, Kale confirmed. I'm no longer the pathetic Omega you rejected. I'm no longer willing to accept other people's definitions of my worth. You think hiding behind a demon makes you strong? Ryan's tone was mocking, but Kale could sense the uncertainty beneath it through his enhanced empathic abilities. You're still the same weak creature I deemed unworthy of alpha blood. Am I? Kale asked quietly. Or are you the same small-minded alpha who was too threatened by potential he couldn't understand to recognize the gift he was throwing away? The barb hit its mark. Ryan's face darkened with rage, and several of the wolves behind him began to shift restlessly. Gift? Ryan spat. You call your freakish abilities a gift? You're an abomination, a creature that doesn't fit into the natural order. That's why you were rejected, not out of fear, but out of disgust. Then why are you here? Kale challenged. If I'm so worthless, why have you brought an army to reclaim me? Why do you care what happens to an abomination you were glad to be rid of? The question clearly caught Ryan off guard. Through his abilities, Kale could sense the alpha's emotional turmoil, anger and pride warring with something that might have been regret, overlaid with a desperate need to maintain face in front of his followers. We care because your abilities make you dangerous in the wrong hands, one of Ryan's lieutenants called out. A demon could use your powers to influence werewolf minds, to turn our own emotions against us. And you couldn't? Kale asked. If I returned with you, would my abilities be used only for healing and comfort? Or would I become a weapon pointed at your enemies? The silence that followed was answer enough. I thought so, Kale said sadly. You don't want to protect me from being used. You want to control how I'm used. You want to ensure that if anyone benefits from my abilities, it's you. Enough philosophical debate, Ryan declared, his patience clearly exhausted. You will return with us, willingly or otherwise. The Omega belongs to the Myrax pack, and we will not be denied what is ours by right of blood. He belongs to no one but himself, Virian said, power beginning to crackle around him like visible electricity. And he has chosen to remain here under my protection. Your protection won't save him from what's coming, Ryan warned. This is bigger than territorial disputes between individual packs and demons. War is coming, and when it does, his abilities will be claimed by whoever proves strongest. At least with us, he'd be among his own kind. My own kind cast me out to die, Kale replied. My own kind called me worthless and pathetic. My own kind stripped me of name and family and left me with nothing. Why would I want to return to that? Because despite everything, you're still Myrax's pack, Ryan said, and for the first time, his tone carried something that might have been genuine feeling. Your blood, your heritage, your very nature, all of it stems from our people. You can't simply walk away from what you are. Can't I? Kale asked. I've been doing exactly that for months now. I found purpose, respect, even something approaching happiness. I've discovered abilities I never knew I possessed and learned to value myself for who I am rather than who others expect me to be." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You're right that I can't change my blood or my heritage. But I can choose how to use them. I can choose who deserves my loyalty. I can choose what kind of life I want to build. And you choose the demon over your own people? I choose the being who saw value in me when I was at my lowest point over the people who threw me away when I didn't meet their expectations," Kale corrected. "I choose the one who helped me heal over the ones who inflicted the wounds. I choose respect over rejection, understanding over judgment, love over duty." The last word slipped out before Kale could stop it, and he felt Virian's surprise through their growing emotional connection. But it was true. What had developed between them over the months had grown beyond gratitude or partnership into something deeper and more precious. Love. Ryan's laugh was harsh and bitter. "A demon doesn't love, Kale. They collect. They use. They consume. You're nothing but a pretty toy he'll discard when he grows bored." "That's where you're wrong," Varian said quietly, his voice carrying such conviction that even Ryan's followers seemed to listen. "I have lived for over 2 millennia, and in all that time, I have never encountered anyone who challenged me to grow, to change, to become better than what I was. Kale has brought light into an existence I hadn't realized had grown dark with loneliness." He turned to look at Kale directly, his red eyes soft with an emotion that transformed his entire expression. "What we have isn't ownership or collection. It's choice. Every day we choose each other. Every day we choose to build something together rather than simply exist side by side." The declaration sent warmth flooding through Kale's chest. To hear his own feelings reflected back, to know that what he'd experienced wasn't one-sided or delusional, was like having a wound he hadn't known existed suddenly heal. "I love you too," he said simply, not caring who heard or what they thought. "How touching," Ryan said coldly, but Kale could sense the fury and frustration in the Alpha's emotional signature. A demon and his pet Omega, playing at romance. "Changes nothing. You're coming with us." "No," Kale said firmly. "I'm not." The refusal seemed to break Ryan's last restraint. "Then we'll take you by force." Warriors advance. What followed was unlike any battle in supernatural history. Instead of meeting violence with violence, Kale did something unprecedented. He opened his empathic abilities fully, projecting not aggression or fear, but understanding. Every werewolf in the attacking force suddenly felt what Kale had experienced. The devastation of rejection, the pain of abandonment, the slow process of healing and growth that had brought him to this point. They felt his genuine affection for Virian, his gratitude for sanctuary, his determination to choose his own path rather than having it chosen for him. Most importantly, they felt the depth of his compassion. Even for them, even for Ryan, even for the people who had hurt him most deeply. The effect was immediate and profound. Several werewolves stopped mid-charge, overwhelmed by the emotional sharing. Others began to question why they were fighting someone who clearly bore them no ill will despite having every reason for hatred. "What did you do?" Ryan demanded, his own emotional barriers strained by the psychic contact. "I showed them the truth," Kale replied gently. "I let them feel what rejection really costs, what abandonment really means. I let them understand that what we've built here isn't a threat to anyone. It's proof that there are other ways to live." "Tricks and manipulation," Ryan snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Honesty and openness," Kale corrected. "The exact opposite of manipulation. I'm not trying to control anyone. I'm trying to help them understand." "Understand what?" "That love freely given is stronger than loyalty extracted by force. That families built by choice often outlast those bound by blood. That sometimes the greatest courage is walking away from a life that makes you miserable to build one that brings joy." The truth of his words seemed to resonate with more than just the attacking werewolves. Several of Ryan's own pack members were looking uncertain, clearly reevaluating everything they thought they knew about strength, leadership, and loyalty. "You're destroying everything," Ryan said, but there was desperation in his voice now rather than anger. "The old ways, the traditions that have kept our people strong for generations. you're making them meaningless. I'm not destroying anything, Kale replied with infinite gentleness. I'm just showing that there might be other ways to be strong, other traditions worth building, other kinds of meaning that don't require anyone to sacrifice their happiness for someone else's vision of what their life should be. And what happens when everyone decides to follow your example? When every omega rejected by their mate comes running to demons for shelter? When every werewolf decides they don't need pack structure or alpha leadership? Then maybe, said a voice from among Ryan's own followers, we need to ask ourselves why so many of our people are miserable enough to want to leave. The speaker was a young beta, barely out of adolescence, but his words carried the weight of uncomfortable truth. Around him, other pack members nodded, their expressions thoughtful rather than hostile. Tomas, Ryan's voice carried a warning that made the young werewolf straighten, but he didn't back down. With respect, Alpha, but maybe he has a point. Half our pack is unhappy with their assigned roles. We've had 3 suicides in the past year from wolves who couldn't handle the pressure of expectations they never chose. When was the last time you saw genuine joy in our territory rather than just grim duty? The question struck at the heart of Ryan's authority, challenging not just his decisions but the entire system he represented. Kale could sense the Alpha's growing desperation as his certainty crumbled. This is what your influence does, Ryan accused, turning back to Kale. You make people question everything, destabilize the very foundations of our society. I make people think, Kale corrected, about whether they're happy, whether their lives have meaning, whether the traditions they follow actually serve them or just maintain someone else's power. And what right do you have to make such decisions for them? I'm not making decisions for anyone, Kale said with quiet firmness. I'm showing them that they have the right to make decisions for themselves, that they don't have to accept misery as the price of belonging, that there are places in the world where being different is valued rather than punished. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a child, a young werewolf boy, perhaps 8 years old, who burst through the line of warriors with the fearless determination that only the very young possessed. Kale! The boy cried, throwing himself into Kale's arms with complete trust. They said you were dead. They said the demons killed you. Kale caught the child automatically, his heart clenching as he recognized little Marcus, the youngest member of a family that lived on the outskirts of Myrax's territory. The boy had always been drawn to Kale, seeking him out for stories and comfort when his own family was too busy with pack duties. I'm alive, Marcus, Kale assured him gently. I'm safe and well. But what are you doing here? This is dangerous. I heard them talking about bringing you back, Marcus said, his young face serious beyond his years. They said you belonged to the pack and had to come home. But I remembered what you always told me. That belonging isn't about where you're born, it's about where you're loved. The child's innocent wisdom hit the assembled werewolves like a physical force. Here was everything they claimed to be fighting for, the next generation, the future of their people, and he was choosing love over loyalty, understanding over blind obedience. You see, Kale said softly, his voice carrying to every werewolf present. Even the children understand what we're really talking about. This isn't about pack loyalty or species purity or traditional values. This is about whether we have the right to choose who we love and how we live. The boy doesn't understand the complexities, Ryan began, but Marcus interrupted him with the devastating honesty that only children could manage. I understand that Kale was always kind to me when the pack adults were too busy, the boy said firmly. I understand that he never made me feel stupid or worthless for asking questions. I understand that when my parents said I wasn't strong enough to be a warrior or smart enough to be a leader, Kale told me I could be anything I wanted if I worked hard enough. Marcus turned to look at Ryan directly, showing no fear despite the Alpha's intimidating presence. I understand that you hurt him really badly and made him go away, and now you want to hurt him more. That's not right, even if you're the Alpha. The simple moral clarity of the child's statement left the adult werewolves speechless. Here was the innocence they claimed to be protecting, and it was judging them and finding them wanting. Marcus, Kale said gently, you need to go back to your parents. This isn't safe for you. I don't want to go back, Marcus said, clinging more tightly to Kale's robes. They said if you came home, you'd have to serve the pack and wouldn't have time for stories anymore. They said you'd probably be sent away again anyway because troublemakers don't belong in proper packs. Did they? Kale's voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. He looked up at Ryan, his expression sad but determined. Is that what awaits me if I return? Service without choice? And exile again if I don't meet expectations? Ryan's silence was answer enough. Then I think you have your answer, Kale said, standing with Marcus still in his arms. I won't return to a life where my value is conditional, where my freedom is an illusion, where even children understand that love is rationed based on usefulness. You're making a mistake, Ryan said, but the fight had gone out of him. When the war comes, and it will come, you'll wish you had pack protection. When the war comes, Vurian interjected, speaking for the first time since the child's arrival, Kale will have something better than pack protection. He'll have the protection of someone who chose to love him, not someone who was obligated to accept him. And if that's not enough, then we'll face whatever comes together, Kale said simply, as we've been doing all along. The standoff continued for a few more minutes, but the heart had gone out of the confrontation. Too many of Ryan's followers had been affected by Kale's empathic sharing. Too many had heard the child's innocent wisdom. Too many had begun to question the very foundations of what they were fighting for. When the retreat finally came, it was quiet and dignified rather than dramatic. Ryan looked at Kale one last time, his expression unreadable. I hope you know what you're choosing, he said. I do, Kale replied. I'm choosing love over duty, understanding over judgment, growth over stagnation. I'm choosing a future I help create rather than one that's imposed on me. And if you regret it, then it will be my regret to bear, Kale said with quiet dignity. My choice, my consequences, my responsibility. Isn't that what growing up really means? Ryan had no answer for that. He turned and walked away, his followers trailing behind him, leaving Kale and Vurian alone in the courtyard with young Marcus still clinging to Kale's robes. That was beautifully done, Vurian said quietly once the werewolves had disappeared into the forest. You could have destroyed him completely, turned his own followers against him through emotional manipulation. Instead, you chose understanding and compassion. He's still the alpha who rejected me, Kale said, settling Marcus more comfortably in his arms. But he's also a person trapped by his own limitations and the expectations of others. I know what that feels like. And the child? Vurian asked, looking at Marcus with something approaching amusement. I don't suppose we can simply send him back to parents who clearly see him as a burden. Marcus, Kale said gently, you know you can't stay here permanently. Your parents will worry, and my parents won't worry, Marcus interrupted with the matter-of-fact sadness that broke Kale's heart. They told me I was old enough to take care of myself now that my older brothers are training to be warriors. They said I should find something useful to do instead of bothering them with questions all the time. Kale and Vurian exchanged glances over the boy's head. They both recognized the signs of a child who had been emotionally abandoned even while remaining physically present in his family home. Well then, Vurian said thoughtfully, I suppose we'll need to prepare another room. I've always wondered what it would be like to have a child in the domain. It might prove educational. Really? Marcus looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. I could stay? I could live here with Kale and learn demon magic and maybe grow wings someday. I'm afraid the wings are species-specific, Vurian said with gentle amusement. But there's certainly magic you could learn. And Kale would undoubtedly be happy to continue telling you stories. This is really what you want? Kale asked, studying the demon's face for any sign of reluctance or obligation. This is really what I want, Vurian confirmed. We've built something beautiful here, you and I. Adding a child to our family would only make it more complete. Family? Marcus asked, his young face lighting up with joy. Like, a real family where people actually want me around? Like a real family where people love you exactly as you are? Kale assured him. Where questions are welcomed instead of discouraged. Where your dreams matter as much as anyone else's. In the months that followed, Their unusual family settled into new rhythms. Marcus proved to be bright and curious, soaking up knowledge like a sponge and bringing a kind of innocent joy to the domain that none of them had realized they were missing. He called Kale Papa and Vurian Father, distinctions that seemed to arise naturally from their different roles in his life. Kale found himself thriving in his role as a parent. His nurturing Omega instincts, so long suppressed and dismissed by his birth pack, finally had a proper outlet. He discovered he had a gift for teaching, for explaining complex concepts in ways that made sense to a young mind, for providing the emotional support and unconditional love that Marcus had been lacking. But more than that, he found himself growing into a role he had never imagined, that of a leader and protector. Word of their sanctuary began to spread throughout the supernatural community, and other outcasts started to arrive. Rejected Omegas like himself, hybrid children caught between species, supernatural beings who didn't fit into traditional categories. "You're building something unprecedented," Vurian observed one evening as they watched from their balcony, while a group of refugee children played in the courtyard below. "A community based on choice rather than birth, love rather than obligation." "We're building it," Kale corrected, leaning into his mate's solid warmth. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Nor I without you," Vurian replied, pressing a kiss to the top of Kale's head. "You've taught me that love isn't about possession or control. It's about mutual choice, mutual growth, mutual support." Their peaceful existence was eventually interrupted by news of the outside world. The war that Ryan had predicted did indeed come, but not in the form anyone had expected. Rather than werewolves versus demons, it became a conflict between those who supported the old ways of rigid hierarchy and species separation, and those who believed in the possibility of change and integration. Kale found himself in the unexpected position of being sought out not as a weapon, but as a mediator. His unique combination of empathic abilities, diplomatic training, and personal experience with both rejection and acceptance made him invaluable in negotiations between different factions. "I never imagined this would be my path," he confided to Vurian after a particularly difficult day of peace talks between werewolf progressives and moderate demon factions. "When Ryan rejected me, I thought my life was over. Now I'm helping to reshape the entire supernatural world." "Perhaps that's why you were rejected," Vurian suggested thoughtfully. "Perhaps the moon goddess knew that a traditional alpha bond would have limited your potential, kept you from becoming who you were truly meant to be." "You think Ryan was right to reject me?" "I think Ryan was a fool who let fear and prejudice blind him to what he was throwing away," Vurian said firmly. "But I also think that his foolishness became our blessing. If he had accepted you, you would have spent your life as the dutiful mate of an alpha, your abilities channeled into supporting his ambitions rather than developing your own potential. And we never would have found each other. And I would have remained a lonely demon lord, accumulating knowledge and power but never understanding their true purpose." Vurian agreed. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst tragedies. As the years passed, their sanctuary grew into something that resembled a small city. They had schools that taught integrated curricula combining the knowledge of multiple species, healing centers that used techniques from various magical traditions, and workshops where beings of different origins collaborated on projects that none could have completed alone. Marcus grew from a lonely child into a confident young man who seemed to embody everything their community stood for. Though he remained fully werewolf, he had learned demon magic from Vurian, Omega empathy techniques from Kale, and diplomatic skills from watching both his parents navigate complex political situations. "I want to be like you when I grow up," he told Kale on his 16th birthday. "Someone who helps outcasts find homes, who shows people that families can be chosen rather than just accepted." "You're already like that," Kale assured him. "You've been helping new arrivals feel welcome since you were 8 years old. You've been showing other children that it's okay to be different, okay to ask questions, okay to dream of something beyond what others expect." "But I want to do more," Marcus insisted with the passionate idealism of youth. "I want to help create a world where no child ever has to choose between being themselves and being loved." "Then that's what you'll do," Vurian said, joining their conversation with the quiet pride that had become his default expression when discussing their son. You have the knowledge, the skills, and most importantly, the heart to make such changes. We both do, Marcus corrected, looking between his two fathers with obvious affection. All of us do. That's what you've taught me. That change doesn't come from one person being special. It comes from ordinary people choosing to be better than what they were. The wisdom in his words was a testament to the life they had built together, the values they had instilled not through lectures but through daily example. Cale felt a profound sense of completion, knowing that whatever happened next, they had succeeded in their most important task, raising a child who would carry their vision forward into the future. On their 10th anniversary together, Virian surprised Cale with a formal bonding ceremony. It wasn't the elaborate public spectacle that werewolf matings typically involved, but an intimate gathering of their chosen family and closest friends, held in the garden where they had spent so many peaceful evenings together. I have lived for over 2 millennia, Virian said as they stood before their assembled loved ones. And in all that time, I never understood what it meant to be truly bonded to another soul. I thought love was about possession, about having something beautiful to display and control. Cale taught me that real love is about setting someone free to become their best self, and choosing to grow alongside them. You saved my life, Cale replied, his voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Not just from death in the forest, but from a life of limitation and self-doubt. You showed me that my worth wasn't determined by other people's approval, that my abilities were gifts rather than curses, that I had the right to choose my own path and build my own happiness. They exchanged rings forged from metals that symbolized both their origins and their chosen future. Silver for Cale's werewolf heritage and obsidian for Virian's demon nature, blended together into something entirely new and uniquely theirs. I choose you, Cale said, the words carrying all the weight of years of mutual devotion and growth. Not because fate decreed it, not because obligation demanded it, but because every day with you has been better than I dreamed possible. I choose you, Virian replied, his ancient eyes bright with unshed tears. My partner, my equal, my heart. You are not my servant or my possession. You are my choice, freely made and joyfully renewed every day. Marcus, now serving as their witness and celebrant, grinned as he pronounced them officially bonded. By the power of love freely given and choice consciously made, I declare you partners in all things now and always. As their community erupted in celebration, Cale found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The rejected Omega had become a respected leader. The ancient demon had learned to love without possessing, and together they had built something that was reshaping the supernatural world. Any regrets? Virian asked as they danced together under the stars, their friends and family celebrating around them. Only that it took a rejection to bring us together, Cale replied with a smile. But perhaps that was necessary. Perhaps I needed to be broken before I could be rebuilt into who I was meant to be. And perhaps I needed to be shown that even demons could learn to love, Virian added. Our scars made us who we are, not in spite of them, but because of how we chose to heal. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and their guests began to disperse, Cale and Virian found themselves standing on the hill overlooking their domain. Below them, the lights of their community twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing a life that had found hope and belonging in their sanctuary. Is this home? Virian asked, echoing a conversation they'd had years before. This is us, Cale replied, just as he had then. And finally, I'm no longer afraid to be myself. As they stood together in the moonlight, surrounded by the evidence of the love they had built and shared, Cale knew that this was indeed home. Not a place, but a choice they made every day to love each other, to protect the vulnerable, and to prove that the strongest bonds were those chosen freely rather than imposed by fate or obligation. The rejected Omega and the ancient demon had found each other against all odds, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. Their love story would be told for generations, not as a tale of destiny fulfilled, but as proof that the greatest love was always a choice, and that the most beautiful families were built not on blood or tradition, but on the simple decision to care for each other unconditionally. In a world that had told them they didn't belong, they had created their own place, their own rules, and their own definition of happiness. And that, Kale thought as he watched their son teaching a group of young outcasts that they too were worthy of love and acceptance, was the most beautiful magic of all.